Beneath the Backcountry by P.J. Taylor. Chapter 2. Dawn broke gray and heavy over Echo Station, the kind of morning where the clouds hung low and dampness clung to the air. The smell of wet pines seeped through the cabin walls, mingling with the bitterness of burned coffee. James Wolfe sat at the table, nursing a chipped mug, eyes gritty from a night of little sleep. Around him the others stirred awake with varying degrees of energy. Sam stumbled out of the bunk room, yawning loud enough to rattle the windows. Isabel already had her auburn hair tied back, flipping through the station's medical kit inventory with clinical focus. Kyle, with his sandy blonde hair and tired irritation, grumbled at the stove, trying to coax life out of the temperamental burner. Thomas Hale emerged last, looking no more rested than James. His eyes were bloodshot, but his movements carried the same steady authority as always. He poured himself coffee and leaned on the counter. "Anything during the night?" he asked. James shook his head. "Quiet. Too quiet." "Same here," Isabel added. "Didn't even hear coyotes." "That's not right," Kyle muttered, still poking at the burner. "Always hear coyotes." Thomas rubbed his temple. "Whatever left those prints either moved on or it knows how to stay out of sight." He let that hang in the air, then straightened. "Today we cover more ground. 2 teams. Proctor and Bennett, you take the South Valley, clear the trail to Twin Lakes, check campsites along the way. Wolfe and Taylor, you're with me on the North Patrol." "What about me?" Evan asked, stepping out of the bunk room with his boots already laced, uniform neat as if he'd been waiting for the question. Thomas's eyes lingered on him. "You stay here. Run comms, check the perimeter sensors again, log the reports. If anything happens, you call us immediately." Evan inclined his head. "Understood." James couldn't tell if that answer carried disappointment or relief. The patrols set out after a sparse breakfast. James strapped on his pack, double-checked his radio and GPS, then followed Thomas and Isabel up the North Trail. The sky remained overcast, the light diffuse and colorless. They moved in silence for the first mile, boots crunching on damp earth, the forest closing in tight around the narrow path. Eventually, Isabel broke it. "Thomas, you think this is connected to last year?" James glanced at her. "What do you mean connected to last year?" Thomas didn't answer right away, his shoulders tense beneath the straps of his pack. Finally, he said, "The incident near Pine Hollow. A group of hikers found a campsite ripped apart, tents shredded, gear scattered. Looked like an animal attack, but..." He trailed off. "But," James prompted. "Like something came in, tore the place to pieces, then vanished without leaving a trace. In the official report, I chalked it up to a black bear and erosion. But with this happening, now..." James felt his stomach knot. "And you didn't think to mention that before today?" Thomas shot him a look. "Would it have changed how you do your job?" James didn't answer. They pressed on. The trail narrowed, winding up through switchbacks where snow lingered in the shadows. Twice they stopped to clear branches that had fallen across the path, sawing and dragging until the way was passable again. Standard ranger work. Grounding. Familiar. But James noticed how often Isabel scanned the tree line, how her hand rested near her bear spray even during the routine tasks. By late morning they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. The wind was colder here, carrying with it the distant roar of water. Thomas set down his pack and raised binoculars. Below, the valley stretched wide, dense forest, broken by a ribbon of river, flashing silver through the trees. James pulled out his own binoculars, sweeping slowly. At first, all he saw was the endless green canopy. Then his breath caught. "Down by the bend," he said. "You see that?" Isabel followed his line. Her face tightened. At the river's edge lay the carcass of a deer. Even from this distance, it was clear something was wrong. The body was half submerged, ribs exposed, flesh stripped in long, unnatural gashes. No scavenger tore prey like that. "Predator kill," Thomas muttered. "But, damn, too clean, too precise." He lowered the binoculars. "We'll check it on the way back. For now, mark the location." James logged the coordinates into his GPS. He felt a chill creep beneath his jacket, despite the climb's exertion. The rest of the patrol was uneventful, at least outwardly. They passed 2 backcountry campsites, both empty but in order, checked trail markers, refilled water bottles at a clear stream. Isabel documented a section of trail where erosion had eaten into the hillside, snapping photos for later maintenance requests. But the forest itself seemed off. Birds were scarce. No chatter of squirrels. Even the usual insect drone was muted. It felt like walking through a church after service had ended, hushed, expectant, waiting. By the time they circled back toward the valley floor, the clouds had thickened, pressing low and heavy. The air smelled of rain. They reached the deer carcass just as the first drops began to fall. Up close, the scene was worse. The animal's chest cavity had been ripped open, organs missing. The hide was peeled back in strips, muscle gouged with frightening precision. Not the chaotic tearing of wolves or bears. This looked deliberate, surgical almost. James crouched near the waterline, covering his nose against the stench. Flies buzzed angrily around the wounds. He studied the ground. No tracks again. Nothing leading in or out. Thomas scowled. Check upstream. They followed the bank for 100 yards. Still nothing. The mud should have held clear prints, but it was as if the predator had flown in and out. Isabel shivered. I don't like this. Neither did James. The unease from the ridge settled heavier in his gut. He snapped photos, then helped Thomas roll the carcass further from the water to prevent contamination downstream. Let's head back, Thomas said finally. His voice was low, grim. We'll log this with Fish and Game. See if they've had other reports. It was mid-afternoon by the time they returned to Echo Station, wet from the steady drizzle. Inside, the air was warm, carrying the aroma of whatever was being thrown together for lunch. Sam and Kyle were already back, boots muddy, faces pale. We found something, Sam said before they'd even shrugged off their packs. Campsite near Twin Lakes, torn apart, similar to last year, Tom. Gear scattered everywhere. No tracks. James felt a cold confirmation settle in his chest. Thomas swore softly. He pulled the radio from the wall, dialing a long-range channel. After a few tries, a voice answered gruff, nasally, the tone of someone who'd been sitting in a truck all day. This is Ranger Hale, Echo Station, Thomas said. Need to report suspicious predator kills. Deer in North Valley, campsite near Twin Lakes. Any activity on your side? There was a pause and static hissed. Then, Fish and Game here. Yeah, we've had reports too. Elk carcass down by Mill Creek, stripped clean. Rancher's dogs went missing last week. I thought it was a cat, but the tracks don't line up. Hell, there aren't any tracks at all. The line went quiet again, as if the officer didn't want to say more over open channels. Finally, we'll keep you posted. But whatever it is, it's spooking the herds bad. Watch yourselves out there. The radio clicked off. The room fell into uneasy silence. James caught Isabel's eye. She looked as troubled as he felt. Different places, same story. Kills with no tracks. Something moving in the forest that shouldn't be there. Thomas set the radio down carefully, his face carved in stone. We keep this contained. No panic. We keep our patrols tight. We log everything, and we don't take chances. His gaze swept the group. And we don't go alone. James nodded slowly. He'd grown up believing the wilderness held dangers, but always within reason: bears, storms, falls. And this felt different. The land itself seemed unsettled, and whatever was moving beneath its canopy was more than just another predator. For the first time since he'd worn the badge, James Wolfe felt that the backcountry he loved might not love him back. Dinner that night was quiet. The usual banter was absent, replaced by the clink of utensils and the occasional scrape of boots shifting on the wood floor. Rain battered the tin roof in steady waves, drowning the silence only slightly. James sat at the table with his food untouched. He caught himself staring at Evan across the room. Evan, with his posture straight, uniform immaculate, eating with slowly, deliberate movements like he wasn't rattled at all. Everyone else carried their unease in the slump of their shoulders or the darting of their eyes. But not Evan. You okay? Isabel asked quietly from beside James. He blinked, forcing himself back. Yeah, just thinking. About what? He hesitated, then lowered his voice. About how predators don't just disappear without tracks. Even cats leave signs. Wolves, bears, hell, even owls leave wing patterns in the snow if you know where to look. But this, he shook his head, this doesn't add up. Isabel pushed her food around her plate. I've seen some bad kills. This is worse. She gave him a sidelong glance. Thomas hasn't told us everything, has he? James looked at the older ranger, who sat apart with a map spread in front of him, marking coordinates with a blunt pencil. His face was unreadable in the dim lantern light. No, James said finally. I don't think he has. Later, when the dishes were stacked and the storm had eased into a drizzle, Thomas gathered them in the main room. Listen up. We're not the only ones seeing this. Fish and Game has reports from 3 valleys over, and Search and Rescue logged a hiker who swears he saw something stalking him near Granite Pass. Said it was on 2 legs 1 minute, 4 the next. They wrote it up as hallucinations from dehydration, but paired with what we've seen, he trailed off, tapping the pencil against the map. 2 legs? Kyle scoffed. Come on, that's... You didn't see that campsite, Sam cut in sharply. You didn't see the way those tents were shredded. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't a bear swatting for food. The room bristled. Thomas let the silence stretch before continuing. We don't jump to conclusions, but we prepare. Double shifts tonight. Nobody goes outside alone. Evan, you're on first watch with me. Evan nodded once. James noticed the way Isabel frowned at that, but she didn't speak. The night stretched long. James tried to sleep, but every gust of wind outside made him jolt awake. His dreams, when they came, were fragmented shadows moving through trees, glowing eyes watching him from just beyond the beam of his flashlight. Near midnight, muffled voices stirred him fully awake. He sat up, heart hammering, and crept to the main room. Thomas and Evan stood by the radio whispering. Thomas's face was grim, lit by the green glow of the receiver. Said it looked human, James caught. Skin wrong, like it was shifting. Evan's voice low and steady. And they didn't survive? No. Rancher found what was left of them this morning. Dogs torn apart too. Fish and Game's keeping it quiet. James froze in the doorway, stomach twisting. He opened his mouth to step in, then Evan glanced sharply toward him, eyes glinting in the half-light. For a heartbeat, James swore they looked different. The pupils were too narrow, the irises too pale. Then the lantern flickered, and it was gone. Something on your mind, Wolf? Thomas asked, voice heavy. James cleared his throat. Couldn't sleep. Heard voices. Thomas's gaze lingered on him. Then he folded the map and switched off the radio. Nothing for you to worry about. Get some rest. Tomorrow we push east to cover the ridge by Deadfall Hollow. James wanted to press, to demand the full truth. But Evan was still watching him, expression unreadable, and James felt suddenly like a deer under a predator's eye. He muttered something about water and retreated to his bunk. Sleep didn't come again. Morning brought thin sunlight and a brittle calm. They packed quickly, splitting again into teams. James went with Isabel and Sam this time, their route taking them deeper into the eastern valley. The trail wound through thick timber, damp from the night's rain. They walked in silence, the air heavy with unspoken tension. It was mid-morning when they found the campsite. At first, James thought it was abandoned. The clearing held 2 collapsed tents, their nylon sagging under wet leaves. A fire ring sat cold, stones blackened. Then the smell hit him. Sweet, metallic rot. He stepped forward, hand instinctively on the butt of his sidearm. Isabel moved to his left, Sam to his right. Together they lifted the nearest tent flap. Inside, sleeping bags were shredded, foam padding slashed to ribbons. Dark stains smeared the nylon walls. A backpack lay half unzipped, contents strewn, but no bodies. The second tent was worse. The fabric was ripped almost in half like something had burst outward, and carved into the canvas deep gouges, 4 at a time, evenly spaced. Claw marks. Jesus, Sam whispered. His face was pale, eyes wide. James crouched, studying the ground, mud disturbed, drag marks leading into the tree line. They didn't walk away from here, he said. They were taken. Isabel swallowed hard. Taken. Where? James followed the drag trail a few feet, but it vanished abruptly as if the victims had been lifted into the air. No prints, no sign of struggle past that point. The forest swallowed the evidence whole. He stood slowly, unease prickling his skin. We need to call this in. Back at Echo Station, Thomas listened to their report without interruption. His jaw worked, but his eyes stayed on the map, tracing lines James couldn't see. When they finished, Thomas exhaled slowly. All right, we mark it. We document everything. And we wait. Wait for what? Isabel snapped. For patterns, Thomas said. These things, whatever they move with purpose. We don't know what it is yet, but it's not random. James bristled. Tell me straight, Thomas. What do you know? The older ranger finally looked up, meeting his eyes. I know. This isn't new. And I know it doesn't stop until something forces it to. The words hung like a storm cloud. Before anyone could answer, the radio crackled. Static burst, then a frantic voice. Echo Station, this is Ranger Morgan at Pine Hollow. We've got a situation, multiple signals on the perimeter sensors, but nothing visible. Motion without bodies, and the dogs are going crazy. The transmission cut off in a sharp crackle. The room went still. Thomas snatched the receiver. Morgan, Pine Hollow, do you copy? Only static answered. Sam cursed under his breath. Isabel's face went rigid. James felt his pulse pound in his ears. Pine Hollow was 15 miles east. If Morgan's sensors were tripping with no visible cause, then whatever was haunting their woods wasn't confined to their valley. It was spreading. And James couldn't shake the image of Evan's pale eyes in the lantern light, watching him with something more than human curiosity. That night, as James lay awake in his bunk, listening to the forest breathe outside, a single thought burrowed into his mind and refused to leave. They aren't just hunting the animals, they're hunting us. This is the end of Chapter 2. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe for the next chapter.